As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
The NBA playoffs are here, and so is The Athletic NBA Daily. Need a fresh, fun take on last night's action? We've got every dunk, buzzer beater, and game-changing play covered. Join Dave DeFore, Zena Keita, and Esperahini Monday through Friday for fast recaps. And join me and Alex Spears Saturdays for Saturday Slam and Jam with playoff trivia and some big-time vibes. All the playoff intel you need, faster than your morning coffee. Listen on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you pod, we're there.
The Athletic.
Hello and welcome to the Race's midweek MotoGP podcast. We've had the Qatar round. We're building up for the excitement of Jerez. I'm Megan White and it's my first time hosting. And as ever, I am joined by Val. Val is always here, though Simon and Matt are currently absent. So Val, let's kick off with Aprilia. It's Thursday today, and Aprilia has today released an extensive update on Jorge Martin's condition after his Qatar Grand Prix crash. He was returning to action after an absence from a different injury. He fell during the Qatar Grand Prix and was hit by Fabio Di Giannantonio, who was running close behind him. He was left with serious injuries and has been in a local intensive care unit ever since. But a new statement from Aprilia has suggested that his condition is showing a slow but steady improvement. He's slowly recovering. He will not be able to return to Europe until his collapsed lung has repaired itself. He's also got 11 rib fractures. And yeah, it's been a difficult time for Jorge Martin and for the Aprilia team. Val, what's the latest?
Yeah, well, as of this recording, the latest is what Aprilia has come out with on Thursday, which, by the time this hits your feed, we may have something new. There might have been some details of how and when he might go to Europe. No concrete timeline right now. Just again, a statement from Aprilia that he still has, the drainage unit. He's still in his lung, obviously helping that whole situation, helping recover the lung. It's not just a pneumothorax. It's pneumothorax. So there's not just air in the chest cavity. There's blood, which just doesn't sound very nice. I wouldn't know how much more or less serious that is. For what it's worth, before that there's pictures of him on Instagram, on his personal Instagram page, and he looks in, as reasonable spirits as you can be. He's already, trying to walk around. He's playing backgammon, I think, with his girlfriend. So, making the most of it. Now, I imagine the facilities at Hamad General in Doha are decent enough, but still, the recovery will probably only go through in earnest once he's back in Europe. As Simon mentioned on our post-race pod, and he was completely right, there's a whole question over when he's fit to fly, when flying doesn't pose a risk because of all the situation that creates with lungs and air and all that, which I'm not a specialist in, but Simon was right. It seems like it's going to take a bit of time. He is still in a lot of pain. 11 rib fractures. I've never had a rib fracture, but when people talk about it, they say that just doing daily stuff, anything, is hideously painful. So you just have to be a vegetable for a bit. You just have to not go about your daily life. You just have to wait for it to fix itself. And obviously with MotoGP riders, every time there's an injury that takes them out for that period, there's the initial recovery period, and then there's the, all right, now let's recover all the muscles that we have period. There's the let's go back to the sports part of it, the training part of it. Let's, even before acclimatizing himself to the bike again, to any bike again, let's, build up the muscle, let's build up the strength, let's, be able to look back in the mirror and recognize your body. And Jorge Martin is still nowhere near that stage. He's still in the initial let's heal stage, not let's build up, but let's heal. There was a report from motorsport.com, the Spanish edition, soon after the race that suggested it's a multi-month thing and potentially almost even after the summer break a return could be. I mean, we don't know. Like MotoGP, you feel like whenever there's a rider injury, there's a recovery timeline, and then that timeline just gets, generally speaking, ignored. It gets shortcut by a month, by a few weeks, etc. I don't know that will be the case here. The summer break feels like a while away, doesn't it? But also the injuries were very, very serious, and the recovery process is not easy. It's not simple. And even though I don't think what happened in Qatar is necessarily can be conclusively linked to him returning early and slightly unfit. There probably will be a conversation about that at some point, but maybe there won't be. Maybe it doesn't necessarily need to be, but there's not going to be any rushing to return, is there? The championship standings this year do not matter for Jorge Martin already officially. That much is clear. It's more of a question of not just what can be salvaged, but what's the smartest way to go about it, because you can't hurry, you can't rush. We know that at Jerez it will be Lorenzo Savadori. Aprilia is entitled to some wildcard running. I don't know if Savadori was planned to be there as a wildcard anyway, but in any case now, he's got a busy schedule again. He's going to have raced most of the races in the first half of the season. It's not fun. It's obviously that's that goes without saying, but it's a rough situation for everybody involved, none more so than Jorge Martin. But again, as we went in on the earlier episode, obviously looking at the replays of the footage, somehow we can't say we got off lightly, I guess. Which, when you read a press release like that.
Yeah, absolutely. When Alex Marquez had a couple of fractured ribs, I think it was 2, it took him, a month to come back with 11 fractured ribs, with the other kind of issues that Jorge Martin's facing, with the fact that he had just come back from another 2 injuries. It's definitely important that he, takes all that time to recover, and hopefully he does have a speedy recovery and gets back to full fitness soon. So, it's a tough start to the year for Martin and for Aprilia as a team. How are the other Aprilia riders doing at the moment, Val?
Yeah, so good to not so good on a scale, as you will all have seen, and it creates this situation for Aprilia where you could clearly feel the vibe, right? That they were hoping that Jorge Martin is back in action in Qatar. He slowly but surely builds up to pace. He slowly but surely starts, first finding already the single lap pace, of which there were hints in Qatar. Then, he builds up the fitness to go through a race weekend in full form. And then suddenly you get at least a better picture of what you can expect from your bike. And now Aprilia, that luxury is again unavailable to Aprilia. Lorenzo Savadori is there to test, and he's their test rider. That's what he's there to do. They're not going to look to him for pure performance. So it's up to the other 3 guys. Marco Bezzecchi is still somewhere along the pathway of his Aprilia adaptation. He is further away than we all thought in the preseason. I think considerably further away, primarily over a single lap. But then again, that conditions the entire weekend. And also, I think this is still not the easiest bike to race. Others in, you remember how many issues Maverick Vinales, Leish Sparger had when, they seem to have a good weekend, and then you'd go into Sunday, Saturday, and there's just nothing. And they're mired somewhere lower down. Maverick would never make any progress. Leish would make some, but never felt like quite enough. But at least with those guys, Aprilia generally knew what it was getting in terms of reference point. Now, we don't know how far along Marco is. Igueras had a phenomenal start to the season, even despite the Qatar GP blip. But we don't we don't know how close he is to the best version of himself and to the best version of the RSGP performance. I mean, I thought he was really, really particularly impressive in Losail in Q1. So that was a fantastic lap. But the full picture isn't clear. And Raul Fernandez is going through it. And he's the only guy you have in the lineup with continuity from the 2024 Aprilia. Now, the question is, we always say you don't know how good your bike is, etc., blah, blah, blah. It's hard to say how much of a problem that is for a manufacturer necessarily, because you would respond with, well, who cares how good it is? Just work to improve it. In any case, why should you look at its current level? Just look at what the riders are complaining about, look at what's missing on the data relative to other manufacturers for them, and work on those areas. But it's obviously never that simple. It's always a case of managing your resources and managing the time available. And in the case of Aprilia this season, now for many more months, it'll have to feel its way forward in the dark a little bit, right? If you see what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, this all kind of feeds into a member's question. I need a little member's question bell. Member's question from Angelina. Is the Aprilia this year just not good, or are the riders just average/injured? Good question, Angelina. Val, what's your initial verdict on that one?
What's your initial verdict on that one?
My initial verdict is that I'm the host.
Right, good point.
No, my initial verdict would be it's kind of too early to tell after 4 rounds if the Aprilia is good or not good because of the problems that they've had. I think it's a bit chicken and an egg. Is the bike not good, or is it the rider problems? And those kind of feed into each other. If there are problems with the bike, they might not have been identified because of the issues with injured riders trying to adapt, the rider who knows the bike from last year having a tough time, and that then feeds into the issues not being fixed, and then that kind of continues. So I guess it is chicken and an egg with that one, from in my opinion anyway.
Yeah. So the problem there is it is a question of priorities, right? So as I mentioned, you only have so much time. There's something you have to focus on. There's some other things that you just have to accept. Obviously, in an ideal world, they just run a million concurrent projects to try to improve every part of the bike. They test that carbon chassis they wheeled out a year ago or so, or whenever it was, and that we haven't really seen in public so much, but they test that 50 million times. There's like 70 clones of Lorenzo Savadori, 70 other clones of Jorge Martin, Marco Bezzecchi, all that kind of stuff. But when you have a limited amount of personnel, limited amount of man hours, limited amount of time, as we all do, you have to pick your battles. And the presence of Jorge Martin, a fit Jorge Martin, will have made it a lot easier for Aprilia to pick its battles. Does it matter how peak good the bike is right now? Maybe not so much. It's looked good. I think it's a good bike. I'm quite convinced it's a legitimate bike, and that it is. When they said it's an upgrade from the 25 and they are convinced in it, I also do believe it. On the 24, sorry, an upgrade on the 24. The question is, where's its performance strengths and weaknesses, and how to separate them from the performance strengths and weaknesses of the current riders. The question is, what part do you need to improve? Because, for instance, if Jorge Martin came in fit, right? And he comes in fit and he gets a couple of weekends and he's barely scraping into Q2, for example. Well, firstly, that says some amazing things about Agura, but beyond that tells you the bike needs single lap work, right? Needs work on the softest tire, needs work in terms of stability, particularly as Marco Bezzecchi is saying. That tells you, because if Jorge Martin couldn't qualify it, then you'd know, that can't be right.
Yeah.
So you'd know what to work in. But right now in the current situation, that picture becomes clouded, and also, it's too early to say that Bezzecchi can't take him to the promised land, right? It's only been 4 rounds on a new bike. He looked, good in preseason. There was a proof of concept of what, at his peak level, Marco Bezzecchi can be effective on the Aprilia. But ultimately, the commitment they've made, the silly season move they've made, all the what the big essence of this project right now is, we went out and signed the champion. So how do we make sure the champion has the best available in 2026?
That's open the Noali clone factory and get 100 Lorenzo Salvadoris out there ASAP.
No, I would not mind 100 Lorenzo Salvadoris. One Lorenzo Salvadori is quite nice. Maybe 100 would be 100 times as nice. But like, if you see what I mean, they signed Jorge Martin with the idea, or at least that's, I think, how we all feel, that, 25, slowly but surely build up, get to know each other, hone the bike around his preferences, do what you need to do. 2026, go in and have a go at the title. What's the point of signing Jorge Martin if you don't see that as an idea, right? 25, I think we all expected unlikely. 26, you got to have a go. But now there's a non-zero chance that you're going to get single-digit races out of a fit Jorge Martin, if that, in 2025. So at that point, you still, obviously, he's still your big hope, and he's presumably your big earner. He's your big draw. He's, your number one plate, even though that's going to be gone for 26. But you want to build around him, and you have to. There's now these questions you have to answer. Maybe, do you try to get yourself further along that route without Martin actually present? So try to do it through Salvadori, through Bezzecchi, through Agura. Try to look at the other manufacturers where you're losing out, and really not just analyze it but act upon it already. Or do you wait a bit? Do you accept that in 25 you've sort of got what you got, and to really know what to do for 26 you need Jorge back, but you can't rush back Jorge because he's already, because he doesn't need that, his health doesn't need that. So it's a complicated situation.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of big questions for Aprilia, both going forward this year and into next year. The big questions for other manufacturers, and probably the next to talk about, is Yamaha. They've been testing their new V4 engine at Valencia this week. What do we know, Val, about this magical new engine, and when can they phase it in, if it's successful?
Yeah, well, my understanding is they can phase it in whenever they want, basically, with the current situation in the rules. To my knowledge of the rules, there's nothing precluding that. I mean, they're a concession manufacturer, so their engine is not frozen in spec. Massimo Bortolini, the project leader, spoke to MotoGP.com. He's confirmed the V4 engine of the current spec is being tested, and that it will be introduced. He said only be introduced, but it will be introduced if and when it is more competitive than the current inline 4 engine and bike. So the new V4 engine and bike is coming. Now, of course, that's a hedging of bets, right? So, that's what you're going to say publicly, that, maybe it isn't going to work. We're still focusing on the inline 4. We're still doing everything also at the same time for the inline 4 to succeed. But logically speaking, if you're that far along, that the V4 is coming sooner or later. I would maybe not even wait for it to be at the same level of performance, because, like, if it's close enough, you pull the trigger, I think. If it's close,
you're putting your eggs in a V4 shaped basket.
Yes, yeah. And there has been a report from Italian outlet GP1 that testing in Valencia, and then there's again, Yamaha is not just testing in Valencia; it's also going to test in Jerez, and then Augusto Fernandez is going to race in Jerez, either as Miguel Oliveira's injury stand-in again, or as a Yamaha wild card. I presume maybe potentially just even as a wild card, because when you're a wild card, there's more stuff you can do even when it comes to the regulatory situation. I think you're not limited by the number of engines you can use. I don't know. I should look into that a little bit closer. But in any case, we'll know once we know what the Oliveira situation is, which again, as of this taping, maybe it's come out that he's racing or he's not racing, but it sounded like he might be, but he's not confident. I think, but yeah, the GP1 report was that not only are they running the 1000cc, the current regulations V4 version, but also potentially an 850. So an 850 for the 2027, sort of first go at it, which you would have to imagine is going to be a V4. So if that's the case, I would not wait for the V4 to be as good, as competitive as an inline 4. Just throw it out there. Make use of all the race weekends you're showing up to anyway. And that it's a question of how much Yamaha has to lose, right? And you can disagree with me on this one here. So Yamaha was third on the grid in Fabio Quartararo's hands in Qatar with the inline four. Yamaha was competitive in the sprint. It was okay in the Grand Prix. But at the same time, you listen to any of the riders, any of its riders, except for maybe Jack Miller. And there's, for the guys who do know the project already for a while, for both Quartararo and Rins, there's a sense of, we're tired of trying incremental stuff. We're tired of trying to find just step by step, little by little with this inline four. We want and need something radical to even sort of to energize the project in a bit. And let's actually hear from Alex Rins from the Qatar Grand Prix about his experience of that race, and so you can hear just how desperate the Yamaha boys are for something new.
When we have a rider in front, like for me was Ogura, that block us. He's doing his race, but I have more performance than him, and I need to wait till he make a mistake for overtook him. I mean, we cannot race like this. The team cannot ask more to us. Me as a rider, every race, every session, I'm asking more, and in the end, there is nothing to do. They need to improve. They know what they need to improve, and yeah, luckily today I make a better start than yesterday.
So yeah, as you can tell, Rins has generally been a bit fed up with also feeling like maybe the package that he has doesn't suit him particularly well. Quartararo has been along several lines, even if, like in Losail, it was quite a productive weekend. He was quite competitive. Again, he was on the front row. It might just be good for the soul of the project to get that V4 out there as soon as possible, like as soon as you can. I think that's what they should do. As soon as it's like baseline competitive.
Yeah, like you said, Val, Fabio was saying last week, stop fiddling with it. Like, just do something. So I guess maybe that big change, even if that big change isn't necessarily a massive leap, at least some sort of change will, give a bit of a boost, give a bit of motivation. And after his great performance last weekend, if he can keep doing things like that on the bike he's on now, imagine what he would be doing if he was on, something even better. So, hopefully there's a lot more to come from Yamaha and from Fabio this season.
If they're slow, they're slow, right? So if they make the change, like right now they're respectable, and in Qatar they were borderline good. Generally speaking, they're somewhere between respectable and so-so. Qatar was probably on the better end of things, but there's going to be other tracks on the better end of things where the Yamaha will look quite attractive. It no longer has the fundamental unsolvable seemingly issue that it cannot qualify. Fabio proved it now can qualify. Jack Miller has proved it. All the credit to Jack. Also on that one, he's proved it right away. When it comes to qualifying, Jack is a spectacular floor raiser, how I would describe it. It's a very American sports term to use, but I think you understand what it means. Not that you don't know American sports yourself, but let's not make this an American sports thing, or they will never let us do this ever again.
Megan and Val's American Sports Podcast.
Val's American Sports. Not happening, don't worry, listeners. But yeah, I think whatever... But I've been more negative on Yamaha's current project than I think most people. But I think whatever's out there in the inline four, even if you believe there's still significant ground left uncovered, I think switch as soon as you can.
Just give Fabio something.
Give him something.
Anything. Yeah. Give Fabio good things, and Fabio will produce great things. Almost
more important than getting yourself into like regular podium contention in 26 or whatever, or like more headlines at the end of 25. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but almost more important than that is give your most important rider something so that he signs on the dotted line for 27.
Yeah, quite. Losing him would be disastrous. So there definitely needs to be some steps forward between now and the point where that contract goes on the table.
Although again, we said that before the most recent renewal, and it sounds like basically a truck full of cash solves that.
12 million euros or something. I would have also signed for 12 million euros.
Yeah, I presume he doesn't take it in other currencies. I don't know. It's a good question.
Still getting around to that fix on your car? You got this. On eBay, you'll find millions of parts guaranteed to fit. Doesn't matter if it's a major engine repair or your first time swapping your windshield wipers. eBay has that part you need, ready to click perfectly into place for changes big and small. Loud or quiet, find all the parts you need at prices you'll love. Guaranteed to fit every time. But you already know that. eBay. Things, people, love. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
Moving on to another Japanese manufacturer, Honda. They are obviously looking at forwards to lineups for next year now, Val. Let's talk about Johann Zarco and Luca Marini.
Yeah, let us. It's an interesting situation being set up at Honda, because it also depends on what it is able to swing on the riders market, as we've discussed previously, for 2026. In theory, you would say maybe not that much because everybody relevant's always sort of under contract, but the persistent suggestion that Pedro Acosta could be extricated, and there's the other persistent suggestion is that something is brewing regarding Toprak Razgatlioglu, although that would, again, he would not come in for 2026 for the final year of the current MotoGP regulations if Honda does make that move. What we do know for sure is Acosta looms in some capacity. He is pretty obviously an object of interest, and there might be a way to make this happen. But then the question mark is the two expiring contracts, because Honda has more expiring contracts on its books for 26 than any other manufacturer in MotoGP. In its two major factory contracts, it is Johann Zarco and Luca Marini. As you've mentioned, Marini's at the Works team, Zarco's at LCR. Zarco was phenomenal in Qatar and generally has had a very, very strong start to the season. He's looked every bit as strong as he has last year, and he was already head and shoulders the best Honda rider last year. We still haven't seen a big enough sample size of Johann Mir this year. I would have felt more comfortable talking about Mir's prospects after Qatar if Qatar wasn't a gastroenteritis nightmare for him.
Yeah,
which
it was another tough one for Johann Mir.
But yeah, you can't really make any assessment based on that, except for to say that the one day that he was okay, again, Zarco can squeeze out more in qualifying. That's just that's the two riders they are. Zarco's a better qualifier than Mir. I think we have enough evidence, MotoGP-wise, from MotoGP history, their respective two histories, to say that Mir's on a 2-year contract. Honda does not break contracts. I don't think so. Whatever happens, he's in there until the end of 2026. We know that there's currently quite active discussions going on already over what's going to happen with the whole Zarco Marini conundrum and the outside options and how they influence that. I think you look at Zarco. Well, you look at Zarco's results, and it's a no-brainer. But obviously, it's not that simple, is it?
Well, let me take this opportunity to introduce another members' question, for which I once again reiterate I need a bell. Mulder said Zarco is proving himself race after race as the best Honda rider. With all the talk of Acosta and Toprak moving to the factory seat, what is it about Zarco that pushes him out the mix? As we've said, Zarco's been really good. So why does it feel like Johann Zarco's going to get shafted?
So Mulder's, is it David Duchovny? Anyway, sorry. I have to do a pop culture thing once every episode. It's in my contract.
Can confirm.
No, it's actually in my contract. It's in my contract not to do it, but I still do it. So, yeah. So the Zarco thing it's very clear for me. Unfortunately, Johann Zarco's 34. It's going to be 37 when the next regulation cycle rolls around. That's not old necessarily, life begins at 40, right? So in theory, his life hasn't even begun yet. But the other options are all younger. The other options are all potentially longer term, even though you can really bite yourself thinking too long term in MotoGP. Zarco's done fantastically at LCR. He's been an enormous asset. There's the arguments to keep him are not complicated. And I do think that from what we've heard from Zarco and from what we know of the sort of situation around Zarco, staying at LCR would be okay. Staying at LCR would be reasonable. He would be, I believe, amenable to that. LCR team boss Lucio Cecchinello, we believe, would be amenable to that. Cecchinello, very, very fond of him. And if you look at LCR's recent results relative to the Honda factory team's recent results, right? I think you got to do what you got to, like, you got to do everything to keep Cecchinello happy and on side, because LCR is a huge asset. And once your bikes are like really good again, LCR is going to be really, really important. And I think it already is really important. Maybe it's almost, right now it's almost too important. I think it is probably a little bit embarrassing that LCR keeps showing up the factory team, which would have never happened when you still had Marc Marquez on the books. But, Marquez is gone, and suddenly you do not have that baseline level of performance in your factory team. And if you just look at the past year and a bit so far, the best Honda headlines have all been Johann Zarco. And on the current level of performance, obviously, it would be unconscionable to leave him out, especially if he wants to stay at LCR. Now, the counter argument to that is, let's say you can somehow get Pedro Acosta, right? And Mir's under contract. That LCR seat suddenly becomes a very, very major strategic importance, because remember, the other LCR seat is Idemitsu. We don't know how easy it is to do things with that seat, because I think ideally, but you don't want to just give up on a rookie after 4 rounds necessarily, obviously, but if you wanted to go for like an all-star lineup the way KTM has done, then obviously Somkhat Chantra, who's currently in a 1+1 deal, would be less of an asset than keeping both Johann Zarco and Luca Marini. But I don't know that there's the sponsorship flexibility, because there's local geographical interests going on in terms of that Idemitsu-backed bike. Could you put Zarco on the Idemitsu and Marini on the Castrol? Probably not. I would be surprised.
It would be a good situation if you could, but like you said,
rider-wise,
if you could,
rider-wise,
well,
that's
Marini's obviously
solution.
got that really analytical brain,
yes,
and Zarco's obviously been putting in some great performances. So to lose one of them would be a massive shame. Yes. But if you can't use that other seat, you can't use the other seat.
And that's the sort of devil's advocate case for, like, I mean, results-wise, I don't think Luca Marini's been bad for Honda, but results-wise, obviously, but his results against Johann Zarco's results, it's not particularly close. I don't think that's unfair to say. Yeah. But we know Honda likes Marini. We know Honda factory team boss Alberto Puig likes Marini. We know that he was quite excited about the impact Marini could have from this, technological development rider standpoint, from the analytical standpoint. You can never be too comfortable attributing, certain development progress, regression, etc., blah, 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 to a rider, because it's, there's 5 million engineers stood behind that. So, it's because we see the riders all the time. I think our brains are naturally wired to see them as the focal point or the cause for everything good or everything bad. But it is inarguable that Luca Marini came in last year at Honda and has, now Honda's in the most promising position it's been in a long, long while. Yeah. And that's happened while it's employed Luca Marini and the factory team with concessions that allow Marini to have more of an impact as not just, a race rider, but a development rider. Marini's also considerably younger than Johann Zarco. And it's just, if you have to flick him now, I mean, maybe Zarco's results and like the opportunity to go get Acosta, maybe you must, but it would kind of be a bit of a waste. You've signed this guy who you want to, you really want to use his sort of analytical approach and engineering nous, and then you've discarded him before the arrival of the next regulation cycle. Feels like kind of a waste. Feels like this is ideally not what you would do, at least to me. I can, like, if you look at the results, it feels like a no-brainer, but if they have to make a decision between Zarco and Marini, I personally, not looking at it from Honda perspective, not looking at it from an LCR perspective, because if I'm LCR, I want Zarco, 100%, 1,000%. But if I'm looking for it from, like, the whole project, I don't know what I do. I couldn't tell you. Which way would you lean, Zarco or Marini for 26-27? Say 2-year deal.
Zarco.
Well, I mean,
I'd keep Marini in some sort of role, whether that's a test rider or whether that's a development thing or whatever it is. I'd keep him in some capacity, but I'd keep Zarco on the bike.
But Like, can you do that? in the sense that, firstly, even in the situation, so the easier situation with Zarco, the positive situation about keeping Zarco is he's at LCR right now anyway. Whatever happens to him in terms of receiving a new deal, it will not be a demotion.
No.
He stays at LCR, he's still at LCR. There's no loss of face, there's no anything, there's no having to accept or feel like you're being undervalued as long as the money still keeps coming into the bank account. For Marini, if you wanted to place him at LCR, you have to convince him that that's fine. Because, even if the money's the same and like you tell him 5 million times, you're still a factory rider, etc., blah, blah, blah. That didn't work for Ducati with Jorge Martin, did it?
No, well, quite.
I'm sure he's a proud guy. And I'm sure that he will potentially back himself to find something else. Maybe with some sort of factory contract. Because, no current room at VR46, even though that's usually the natural destination. But a move for Acosta creates a gap at KTM, for instance. There's no Newton's law of whatever, right?
Yeah, that the KTM
action,
thing.
Reaction. Yeah.
The KTM thing is a good point and actually follows nicely onto talking about KTM. Obviously, Maverick Vinales had a fantastic weekend in Qatar. We will not talk about the tyre penalty thing, but KTM obviously needs to find out what worked right. Can anyone else do it? And how does that change things for the year? Val, where are they at right now?
Yep. So that's the most complicated one, isn't it? Because we've heard, again, suggestions out of Enea Bastianini coming out of the weekend that Vinales runs something different to the others. That's been countered a little bit in the press by his team boss, Hervé Poncharal, with the explanation that it's not that Vinales is being prioritized. It's that KTM's development has been such and its situation has been such that there's just a lot of specs going on and riders are picking and choosing what they prefer. And I'm paraphrasing a bit what he's saying there, but it tallies with what we've heard about KTM so far this season, right? Is that everybody's running all sorts of things. Obviously, from that rear mass damper box that currently only appears to be on the Bastianini bike, to certain winglet arrangements, to presumably other internal stuff inside the bike. So KTM is in a position so far this season where I don't think it can feel particularly comfortable about knowing which of its riders are actually performing, which of them aren't, why aren't they doing it, why they are doing it, because the way the project began the season, it's sort of been all hands on deck figuring out performance respectability, right? Instead of trying to gauge anything in terms of the riders. So KTM now has a proof of concept in a certain way in Qatar. You look at Vinales' race results. He lost a 10th a lap to Marquez in the race, right? So a 10th a lap, that's impossible under the current MotoGP conditions. No other bike on the grid you would look at right now and say it's possible going a 10th a lap to the lead Ducati at any track. We've not seen other bikes on the Grand Prix podium in forever. Like they don't got it. They're not doing it right now. None of them. KTM is the first time we've seen this season clear, genuine evidence that there's a non-Ducati bike on the grid that can somehow finagle itself into a position to almost nearly win in a full distance race. I mean, he didn't win, but he got within the margin of error. Which, I mean, okay. So also his tire pressures were illegal, which Poncharal says did not have any impact on performance. I mean, it's got to have a little bit of an impact, right? Like just a little bit, but it can't be transformative to the bike space. KTM's big question right now is, what can we learn from that performance? Basically, what's not even like just how repeatable it is, but like why? What does it tell us? What does it tell us about, like, they need to take every single aspect of that package, because potentially the answers that exist in the combination of the spec Vinales was running, the lap times Vinales was managing, what was happening to his tire in that race. We've seen the KTM be outlier good in Qatar before, right? But it was Brad Binder usually. It was not was not Maverick Vinales. And Brad Binder was really quite poor this past weekend. So they got to take the full array of data from that run and just figure out what the game plan is based on that, both in terms of the bike and in terms of the rider. A big subplot to that, and I think let me ask you this, because there's the popular sentiment, and we've talked about this with Simon already, but the popular sentiment is basically that the entire MotoGP media potentially bluffed the rest of the world by screaming praises of Pedro Acosta all of last season. Actually, he's not all that. Do you think there's anything so far in 2025 that puts us in a position where we need to interrogate our assumptions about Pedro Acosta a bit more?
No, because he has generally been, if not the fastest KTM, then nearly the fastest KTM.
That's
obviously
kind of
this last weekend,
too, yeah.
Maverick Vinales had his annual mental Maverick does an incredible race once a year, and that's him. But that's slightly unfair to Maverick. He just put in, good performances.
Yes.
But he has that one race a year where he'll just do an incredible race. And as you said, they need to learn from that. But I don't think that the wider landscape reflects on Pedro. I think the wider landscape reflects on what's going on at KTM and all the problems that they've been having with the finances and everything like that. That's more of the issue, I would say, that's affecting Pedro's performance than Pedro Acosta not being it. Because he quite clearly is very, very good. We saw that last year. We saw that a lot at the start of last year. So I don't think that Pedro Acosta's the issue there. I think it's kind of easy. It's like when you, not to make this the American sports podcast, it's like when you get an NHL rookie, they get drafted to the worst team because that's how the drafts work. And then everyone goes, Connor Bedard's not even that good. And it's like, well, that's not really an accurate reflection of this because he's at the worst team.
Yeah,
so
no, I know what you mean.
KTM are not the worst team in this, in this example, but it's that thing of he's a great rider. He's clearly very talented. Valentino Rossi was singing his praises. People can look at the situation and go, oh, he's not even that good. But I think it's much more complex than just what's on those result sheets because of the financial situation and the implications that's having on, like you said, the Matikoff and pick and mix of parts and, how that's working behind the scenes, we don't really know. But it could be having a massive impact on staffing, on development, on all the rest of it. So that complex situation there kind of maybe is misleading when it comes to Acosta's results, I think.
I agree. And there's also probably some level going on of struggling to accept the reality of the situation. But that is also relevant to KTM. Struggling to accept on Acosta's side, which I think is relevant to the KTM. I think I've read some recent comments from team manager Alberto Valera, albeit coming before Vinales' performance. But, still, Acosta's camp is still quite careful what he says. I think he's more on the conservative side. Acosta, when he talks, he's, very KTM focused, very, very careful. But Valera, in his position as the agent, as he should be doing, seems more open to acknowledging the possibility of Acosta looking around for other options going forward. So for me, the question for KTM is, how do you use this Vinales performance to be able to help yourself hang on to Acosta? And that will sound very insulting and very annoying. Very annoying to some of our listeners. It'll sound insulting to Vinales, but people who listen to this podcast know that, Val underrating Vinales is not a thing that happens, so don't worry about that. We went into this season, and specifically I went into this season thinking the KTM might actually unlock Maverick. It made sense to me, and it still does, and I think I saw in Qatar the proof of concept that I had in my head, because it'll help him qualify better, it'll help him lose fewer positions on the start, and then he does the rest in clean air. I'm still quite excited to see how that works out. But let's assume, because otherwise there's no point to any of this, let's assume KTM is staying in 27. Let's assume the money will be there. Let's assume the project is able to continue. They're able to convince investors, etc., blah, 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 that this is an integral part of the project and the spending stays relevant, etc. But then you got to hang on to Pedro. So how do you do it? How do you use this result to help yourself do it? Because they got the hardest part done. The hardest part of the project was done. The rider who can win a championship for you is here. mean, maybe on the evidence of Qatar, maybe you could say 2 riders who can win a championship is here. But let's not go there yet. But I want to sometimes. But the rider who you have a very reasonable bet on is here. So how do you make sure the restlessness doesn't overtake him, basically? And because regardless of what his contract says, we're talking about potentially being extricated for money for 26 into Honda. But, if that doesn't happen for 26, you still got to do it you got to hang on for 27. And that would not be any contractual mechanism. That's a whole new negotiation and a freer market and people bidding for him and serious big time people bidding for him. So what do you do? How are you going to play it? And again, there's going to be people who are like, he's not that important. Maverick has just shown you that actually you can get by without him. I think that would be a mistake, but it's also something to think about.
I absolutely agree, Val. So, last but not least, some could say saving the best till last. Let's talk about Ducati. Continuing the Pedro Acosta theme, looking at their lineup, going forwards. If Pedro Acosta becomes available and you are Ducati, do you get in there, Val, or do you think that they have too much to lose if they tinker with the lineup that they've got?
Yeah, it's difficult. They're in a position of luxury where that's the question, I guess, isn't it? Because the way I see it right now in terms of the bike development, and it could change. There's still so many races of this regulation cycle to go, right? Where another 18 this season, 20 plus next season. So you're looking at still 40 sprints, 40 Grand Prix under this current regulation cycle with these frozen engines for some, unfrozen for others. So maybe things could change, but for me, Ducati will have the 25 champion and they will have the 26 champion. That's my suspicion. That is what I expect.
That's the same champion.
Well, probably, maybe, but that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is because if it's not the same champion, if whoever that person is has a really bad hangnail and can't ride for 3 rounds or whatever, then the next man up does it. That's the wonderful position they're in right now in the standings. They've got the top 5 under lock and key, and that's with all the stuff that's happened to Fabio Di Giannantonio so far this season. So actually, they were going to have the top 5 well clearer. That's still, maybe Qatar and the KTM thing is a slight alarm bell, but that's still a bike that, under most conditions, in most circumstances, the rest of the grid cannot reach, cannot touch, cannot lay a glove on. And all the riders you have can exploit it. All of them. Probably not going to be the case for 27. That's a bit of a clean slate. So at that point, you need to start really succession planning, thinking about what ideally you want to do for 27, thinking about, I think that the factory lineup you would want to keep the same, obviously. Don't see any reason to try to change that. I also don't see why it would change necessarily, unless a truck of cash from Honda goes Marc Marquez's way and he feels romantic about it while also looking at the truck of cash. But that's, we're still far away from that. But the question right now is, do you need to try to forward plan right now and protect yourself against an Acosta burst, like Pedro Acosta going supernova? Do you need to make sure that you have everything in place, you've pulled out all the stops to make sure that even if you get reeled in technologically in 27 by Yamaha, by Honda, by KTM, by Aprilia, whatever, then on the rider side, you've deprived them of oxygen as much as possible. To do that, Ducati would have to spend more on contracts than it usually does. Considerably more. Considerably more. And because we know already that it's scaled down what it does in MotoGP in terms of, factory contracts and stuff. It has 4 riders on the factory contracts right now, but only 3 of them have up to spec GP25 bikes, whatever GP25 actually is right now. The plan was for only 3 riders to have all that new stuff. We don't know what that plan will look like for 2026, but we know that Ducati is winning so comfortably that justifying any further spending to protect itself, feels unreasonable. Feels like you've hit up to marginal gains and then more so. It feels like when any rider you have on the lineup, like let's say Marc Marquez, Pecco Bagnaia, Franco Morbidelli, and Alex Marquez, I don't know, all decide to retire. Like they want to start their own Beatles tribute act, so they all buzz off and they go do the Abbey Road shoots, etc. Then Fabio Di Giannantonio. No, that's that section. We cannot have that section in this episode. But let's say that happens. Fabio Di Giannantonio wins the championship for you. You've still won the championship. You can lose 66% of your lineup and you're still fine. So because of that, if I'm, Gigi Dell'Igna, I know his name is Luigi, but that was really weird for me.
It's like when you're in trouble with your mum and she calls you your full name. Gosh.
Yeah, he's in trouble for making the best MotoGP bike ever. How dare he? Yeah, he's in trouble for the fact that we've not seen a non-Ducati winner in what feels like 20 years at this point. But if you're Dell'Igna, you can't go to your paymasters and go, look, we're winning every race, but can I have Pedro? Please? Pretty please? Can you make it happen? Can you make it so that we can install him at VR36 somehow? Because if I was Acosta also, the financial and the prestige stuff doesn't make sense to me. But you at least, if there is any indication, you can make it happen. Like if Valentino Rossi comes in and says, hey, look, we can get him. It's possible for us. Ducati then needs to think, all right, as we've already once upset the apple cart, inviting Marc Marquez fully into the fold, which is paying enormous benefits, do we do it again?
Well, and also the other question is, would Pedro Acosta want to go to a satellite team?
Yeah, it's a good question.
He might be like, no, I've just got to the factory team. Why am I going to go, even if it's on a Ducati, why am I going to go and ride for a satellite team? I don't care how factory supported the satellite team is. Why am I going to a satellite team?
Yeah, but he's not.
Because there's no space.
But he's not won anything yet.
Space well, no, quite.
Yeah.
But
if you're Pedro Acosta, you believe you can take on Marc and Pecco if there's equipment parity sufficient. And right now you don't win a MotoGP championship on anything other than a Desmosedici. I mean, for 27, presumably that can change. My 26, I'm not feeling super confident about, but The other point is, of course, we've not mentioned all of their riders, have we? there's one extra one.
Well, quite. Members' question. Michael Sanderson, what did you think of Fermin Aldeguer's race? Is this sort of form sustainable? Let's talk about the rider we haven't talked about.
Let's talk about the rider we haven't talked about. Finally, it's my hour to talk about Fermin some more. And what I want to say is, I don't know. So they've done the right thing, bringing him in, right? Is that okay to say at this point, or are we still a bit so-so? Is there still not enough?
I was saying it at the weekend. Right. I was like, actually, I was saying at the weekend that Agura, who we didn't know how Agura would be, we didn't know how Aldeguer would be. They've both actually been, they've not won anything, they don't win on the podium, whatever, but they've both been good enough. Yeah. They've both done a really decent job so far. They've not been miles off, and I think that's kind of, that's good.
Agura's been better than Aldeguer, but Aldeguer is 4 years younger. And so it's much rawer prospect. You've put him in a position specifically where you will back him to develop. He has a bike to cover up any, if the qualifying isn't coming on still yet, who cares? Whatever, it does not matter. He can lose to Marc by 0.6 in qualifying, and that's still enough to get him high up to where he can then do some damage in races. And already the Losail rides were very, very impressively managed. It's going to be worse weekends than this, obviously, in the near future, because this was a particularly clean and tidy one. Just looked very, very impressive. But the proof of concept already exists that, Ducati does not have to wait a full year to see any glimpse. The glimpse is here. You got it. You see that it can work. So the high upside rider, there's a glimpse of his upside right away, which is very, very nice for Ducati. Does having Fermin Aldeguer impact how you look at Acosta potentially, and whether you because that's obviously a future move. So do you then go, you know what, this is our succession plan to Marc and Pecco. This is the guy. We don't need any other guys. I mean, obviously you can't say that yet. 4 races into the season. Aldeguer has not accomplished anywhere near yet close to what we've seen from Acosta in MotoGP so far. He's also not had the sample size, so all's fair. But Acosta was exceptional last year. Aldeguer so far is just, he's gone from mediocre to pretty good, which is already very impressive because he's very young, but you still don't know. You can't have them all. I think Gigi really likes Aldeguer. I think he really saw something special about Aldeguer. I think whatever goes on with the rest of the lineup shuffling, etc., you continue with the Aldeguer experiment these 2 years for sure, 100%. But also by then you need to have an idea of what you're doing with the rest of the moving pieces. But it would also be a bit mean for them to try to also get Acosta, right? That would be...
Give Firmin a chance.
Impolite.
Yeah.
No. For Firmin has to stay. Yeah. Not that there's been any doubt about him staying. It's just, longer term. He's on a 2 year plus 2 year deal. So that was also a big, I think, show of faith from Ducati that if you're as good as we think you are, then we want to have the contractual mechanism to extend you immediately, to not let anybody have a run at you.
I seem to remember when this was announced, everyone was a bit like, that was very premature. But actually, he's doing well. And 4 races into a season, it's very early, but he has done well enough to be saying that at this point. Yes. So, looking ahead, round 5, Jerez, this weekend at time of release. Are your predictions that Marc Marquez is going to win both races or just one of them?
Right. Well, but he was really good at Jerez last season, was he? In terms of the actual race execution, he was fantastic. Bagnaia, I think, generally pretty strong there, if I remember correctly. Oh, you've put me on the spot. That's such a simple question, but one I've not really given a lot of thought to.
I haven't given it a lot of thought either, but
because it's Mark.
But it's Mark and Mark. It's just Mark weekend.
There's only 2 races, so it can't be Mark and Mark.
It's pole for Mark, it's sprint for Mark, and it's Grand Prix for Mark. It's Marc Marquez's world, and we're living in it, and that's what's going to happen. Hopefully, there's some excitement around to slightly further back in the field to spice things up a bit. Otherwise, it might be quite boring. But
we have no evidence from Pecco so far that he can beat Mark in a straight fight in 2025. So far, we don't have it, so I think predicting anything else at this point, until he shows us that he can, and maybe he will this upcoming weekend.
Or maybe it'll be Alex Marquez.
Maybe it'll be Firmin Aldeguer.
Maybe it will. You'll find out this weekend. That's all from me and Val, and we'll be back very soon.
The Athletic.